There are tales and stories that we tell to scare one another, to prey on fears and insecurities for our own amusement. And then there are cautionary tales that we tell because we believe they keep us safe, or at least they give the illusion of safety. But there are also stories like today's that are a strange combination of the two. What started off as a cautionary tale has now become an urban legend. And with the release of The Curse of La Llorona on the big screen, I guess now would be a perfect time to examine the legend that we've previously discussed, but in some more detail. La Llorona primarily appears in Mexican folklore, and her name translated from Spanish means the weeping woman. No one really knows the exact origin of La Llorona, but her story has existed since the 16th century during the time of the conquistadors. Today she's definitely become what we would describe as an urban legend. A ghost of a thin woman dressed in a white or black gown who weeps as she roams the lakes and creeks in search of children to drag to a watery grave. Whatever you do, don't go out past dark, or La Llorona will take you. Something that I'm sure many of my Hispanic followers and viewers would have heard growing up from parents or grandparents. Similar to tales of Lamia, Baba Yaga, or even just the boogeyman, La Llorona was a cautionary tale told mostly to children. Now of course she wasn't always this ghostly figure who drowned kids in the river. There is a backstory, or in this case there are several explanations as to how she became the weeping woman, and judging by the name I'm sure you've gathered that these aren't going to be happy stories. In most stories she's referred to as a woman named Maria, who came from a very poor background. The first story that we'll be discussing today involves Maria marrying a wealthy man who had a rather shady past, being an alcoholic and a womanizer. Regardless, Maria still loved him with all of her heart, and she had hoped that for her he would change his ways. And he did. In the beginning he showered her with gifts and gave her all of his attention. But this of course wouldn't last for very long. When Maria had his two sons, he began to change, return into his womanizing ways and turn into alcohol to fill the void that she once filled. He would leave Maria and their boys alone for months on end with no explanation or warning, and eventually he became so disinterested that he told Maria he was leaving her for a woman of his own wealth and social standing. As you can imagine, Maria didn't take this too well, especially as he would only return to visit his children, leading her to resent them more and more each day. Eventually it all became too much, and during a walk by the river she noticed her ex-husband in a carriage with a younger and far more beautiful woman. He stopped the carriage, but only to speak to his children before driving off, completely ignoring Maria. For Maria this would be the last straw, and in a fit of rage she threw her children into the river and watched as they drowned and disappeared down the stream. And by the time she came to her senses, it was too late. She tried to find her children along the riverbank, but they were no longer in sight. In her grief she ran down the streets of her town, screaming and wailing uncontrollably for her lost children. Soon after, grief-stricken and with no will left, Maria was found dead by the very same riverbank that she had thrown her sons in. Upon reaching the gates of heaven, she was asked about the whereabouts of her children, to which she had no answer, and so she was denied entry into the afterlife. She would instead spend eternity in between the land of the living and the land of the dead, searching for her lost children. It's believed she was then seen on the banks of the river Santa Fe, looking for children to drown, so that others might feel the same pain and loss that she was cursed to feel. There are several other versions that attempt to tell the origin story of La Llorona, the two most popular being that La Llorona was, or at least is linked to the Aztec goddess Ciacoatl, a snake woman associated with motherhood and fertility who dresses in white and walks the night weeping and wailing. She was also considered an omen of war. Many believe the legend of La Llorona came to exist because Ciacoatl roamed the rivers moaning and weeping to warn the people of the invading conquistadors. In some stories, Maria's husband was actually a Spanish conquistador who abandons her and leaves her to care for her children alone. This conquistador at times was even believed to be Hernan Cortez, who was famous for leading the Spanish expedition that led to the fall of the Aztec Empire. In these stories, Maria is described as his interpreter and concubine. Cortez then, of course, would leave her to marry a Spanish woman. Maria, disgraced and shunned by her own people, out of vengeance then killed Cortez's children. There are different variants of this story that are a little bit more vague, that simply describe Maria being jilted by a Spanish lover. Interestingly enough, Maria isn't always the victim of a terrible marriage. There are stories where she was a rather vain woman who spent all of her time partying and neglecting her children. One night when she returned home, both of her sons had drowned, and for this neglect she was cursed in the afterlife. Now, the stories of La Llorona do vary drastically, and the rivers of Mexico aren't the only place in Latin America where people have claimed to have seen her, or at least heard her wailing. Even her behavior can vary from region to region. Some believe that she only drowns children, whereas others also believe that she kills men because of her lost lover. There are also tales where she's far more barbaric, killing anyone who crosses her path, man, woman, or child. Now, as with most urban legends that we cannot prove, there are some quite wild stories involving the Weeping Woman. The year is 1986 in Houston, Texas, and a woman by the name of Juana tried to kill her 7 children by throwing them in the Buffalo Bayou. When questioned by the authorities, she told them that she believed that she was La Llorona. Upon further investigation, it turns out that she was a victim of domestic violence so bad that she wanted to end her suffering, as well as that of her children. Sadly, 2 of her children did in fact die, in what turned out to be an odd and truly disturbing story. There is also a story of a boy who would routinely argue with his mother. One day, after a particularly heated argument, the boy and his brothers left their ranch and made their way to Santa Fe in a carriage. When they arrived at the riverbank, they saw a tall, thin woman dressed in white with a black veil covering her face. All of a sudden, she appeared in the carriage seat, right in between the brothers, leaving the brothers petrified and speechless. When the brothers decided to turn around and head home, she turned to face them and said, "If you argue with your mother, I will visit you again." The boys continued on their way home, heeding the warning of La Llorona to respect their mother, as the next time they encountered the Weeping Woman, she may not have been so friendly. I've also come across stories of people that claim during their dreams and encounters of La Llorona, she removes her veil, which means she has chosen you to join her in her search for her children in the afterlife, which is also in itself quite a scary thought. If she doesn't kill you, then you may be cursed for eternity. The fact that I've never been to Mexico, and I'm also not Hispanic, means I can't really say what it's like growing up with these stories. But La Llorona certainly seems to be more than just a ghost story. There seems to be a lot of superstition surrounding her in Latin America, and that's definitely something that's been passed down from generation to generation. Despite it being a story used to stop children from going out late at night, it seems that you don't have to look particularly far to find someone who either knows someone or who themselves have had an encounter with La Llorona. It is definitely interesting to see so many similar stories in cultures all around the world. In Greek mythology, both Lamia and Medea have similar stories, being women who are scorned and ultimately end up killing children. If we take the more Aztec idea of her image being seen as a warning of danger, that in itself is quite similar to the Irish myths of the Banshee, who also has a fairly similar appearance. These stories lead into the theory that La Llorona might be similar to the European myths because the Europeans may have influenced the native stories during their expeditions, but I guess we'll never know for sure. A cautionary tale, or a terrifying legend? I'll leave you to decide, and if you are someone who has grown up with these stories, then feel free to share those in the comments below. As always, I've been your host, Mythology and Fiction Explained.